The affair began in my office one cold morning in late November. The Indian affair. It began, like many of history's great events, with only the faintest hint of the upheaval that was to come.
I'm delighted with the campaign, but yes, I know you people will be too.
I run an international advertising agency in London. 2 or 3 times a year, I have to make a trip to Australia, and I was due off for the next one in a couple of weeks' time. It was a Friday, I remember. I was bogged down in paperwork when she phoned.
Sydney, Australia.
Car for you on 3, sir. Darling, I know you're frantically busy, so I will be quick, I promise. Listen, it's so sweet of you to let me come with you, but... Well, why I'm ringing is that I've been...
It took me a moment to realize that she was talking about the trip.
Darling, you haven't
I'd agreed to take her with me for once.
I'm really ringing to ask...
Anyway, I settled back to listen. I always settle back to listen to that girl.
Holiday on the way there.
A week? You must be out of your mind.
Don't be emotional, darling. You know we're landing in India. Well, why don't we stay there for a week? I mean, the fares are already paid, and it'll only cost a little more in India. We could see some incredible places.
She's really gone potty this time.
Darling, you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Well, could I just tell you some of the things we could do? We could start in Delhi. The old city is fantastically old and full of the most beautiful buildings, like the Qutub Minar, which is a massive tower overlooking the city and was built before the Mughals came to India.
I asked her how she'd suddenly become a world authority on India, and she told me that she'd got hold of a brochure about something called Stopover tours. She'd happened to be passing the Indian tourist office, had popped in, and had been received with open arms by the people there, who'd been particularly kind and helpful, and she'd even managed to see a couple of films. And bless her heart, she'd also begun to learn how to pronounce the Indian names.
Anyway, to go back to Delhi. People were civilized in India when we were still running around in woad, and there are still thousands of spectacularly old buildings to be seen, like the massive red fort that the Emperor Shah Jahan built, from where he ruled this enormous country and lived in splendor. But apart from the old monuments, Delhi is also a very modern city, and you could see the Parliament buildings and all the kind of places you like. There are super hotels along the routes, like the Ashoka Hotel in Delhi. They seem to be very well-run package tours.
Please don't talk to me about package tours.
Oh, they're not package tours in coaches. They're different. For a start, they're tailor-made for Indian conditions, and they don't make you rush around. You know, they're personalized. For instance, in a hotel like the Ashoka, they really have the time to take care of you, and it's very modern, and the facilities sound as good as in any hotel in the world. Imagine drinking gin and tonics by the pool under an Indian sun. In Delhi, we could see the most spectacular festival called Ram Lila. It commemorates a great hero in Indian legends who was called Ram. He was deeply in love with his wife Sita, but Sita was taken away by a demon king called Ravan. So Ram was helped by the king of the monkeys and by his own brothers to get her back. At the end of the festival, there's an enormous firework display, and Ram fires an arrow at the wicked Ravan, and this huge model of him, which is full of fireworks and 100 feet high, explodes and crashes to the ground in flames. Then, from Delhi, we could go to Chandigarh. It was designed by Le Corbusier in the 50s, and it sounds amazing. It just goes to show how modern India can be despite 5,000 years of history. There's the famous Mahatma Gandhi Library and a charming hotel. There's a university and a theatre, and I'm dying to see one of those Punjabi dances.
फिर क्या हुआ?
फिर चमका गिरा दे हम दोनों की तकरार में
Srinagar, which is far north in Kashmir, they have the most heavenly lakes and the most beautiful flowers in the world. We could stay in the Oberoi Palace Hotel by the lake, which was owned by a Maharaja until very recently. Or we could stay in a fairy tale houseboat on the Dal Lake. They're very inexpensive and surrounded by mountains and magnificent scenery. And we could fill the boat with flowers and it would be so romantic. But don't you dare look at those beautiful Indian girls, or I'll rush to the nearest mountain top and become a holy woman. Do you know that the highest golf course in the world is in Kashmir at Gulmarg? It's 9,000 feet up and surrounded by the high Himalayas. Imagine seeing Annapurna in Nepal. It's the third highest mountain in the world, and we could see it from Kathmandu. Imagine Kathmandu, with hundreds of temples and prayer wheels and monks and beautiful hill people.
But what about the food in India?
All over the subcontinent you can have European or Indian food. You don't have to eat the Indian food, but I shall stick to my curries. And anyway, who wants to go all the way to India to eat fish and chips? Some of the hotels in India are converted from old palaces. In Hyderabad, there's an incredibly romantic palace called the Image of Heaven. It belongs to the Nizam, who used to be the richest man in the world. And he's turning it into a hotel, and he's leaving his own possessions in it for the guests to enjoy. And at Jaipur, there's another called the Rambag Palace Hotel. And when you stay there, they really make you feel grand. And darling, you can guess how much I want to see those fabulous Indian fabrics. Tie and dye from Jaipur, and brocades from Benares, and silks from Madras, and oh, how I want a sari. Of course, in Jaipur, there's that enormous sundial. It's part of an extraordinary observatory that was built in the 18th century by a Maharaja with a passion for stargazing. And there's a wind palace where they used to sit high up in the cool air and watch the snake charmers in the street below. Rajasthan seems to be a land of palaces and forts. The Maharaja of Jaipur in the 17th century built a fairy tale palace for his beloved wife. She was a princess of the Sisodia clan from Udaipur estate, 200 miles away, and she felt so homesick for her own land of hills and lakes that he built her a beautiful little palace, just like they have in Udaipur, with a terraced Mughal garden. And so she sat, the little Sisodia princess, dreaming of her lake home in Udaipur. And if we went to Udaipur, we could stay in the Lake Palace Hotel. It used to be the Maharana of Udaipur's island palace, but he turned it into a hotel some years ago. People say that it's the most beautiful hotel in the world, and it's surrounded by lakes and hills. And then, of course, there's always the Taj Mahal, and the sad story of how it was built. Everyone knows about the elephants in India, but did you realize how many wonderful sanctuaries there were all over the country, and what an extraordinary range of exotic animals and birds one could find in them? How could we go to India and not see the wildlife?
Well, of course, her description of the wildlife convinced me. How could I say no? I never could refuse her anything anyway.
Erica, cable Australia and tell them that I'll be there a week later, will you? Oh, and get the travel agents on the line too.
I've already drafted the cable, and you have an appointment with the travel agents tomorrow.
Thank you, Erica. Thank you.
So there we were, on the way to India, looking forward to our stolen holiday. The first thing that struck me was what a modern, booming city Bombay was. Extraordinary that we Westerners can have so many misconceptions about India. Of course the country has problems, but for me, Bombay was spectacular evidence that India was rapidly rising above them. On that first morning, we sat in a rooftop restaurant and planned what we were going to do on the journey. Helen has a passion for expensive old junk and clothes. So we started in one of the street markets to get her kitted out. In London, that morning would have cost me a month's profit. I remember we went back to our beautiful air-conditioned hotel, the Taj Mahal, for lunch. And what a fabulous lunch. Even Helen didn't miss her beloved curry. Life was good. I was already feeling foolish about my fears about the food, the hotels, and the climate. Anyway, the tour was about to begin, and we drank a toast to ourselves and to the happy days to come. Next day, we were off from Santa Cruz Airport outside Bombay to begin what actually did turn out to be the old journey of a lifetime, even though it only lasted for 1 week. The amazing thing to me is that literally millions of people fly over India every year, and they simply don't know what they're missing by not stopping off. Looking back on it now, I can see how easy it all was. We traveled by Indian Airlines. That's the internal airline that reaches most parts of this enormous country. I remember thinking in London that to see all India must be impossible. It is a bit bigger than the Isle of Wight, you know.
Well, we're not going to try and see it all in one go, silly. Let's just concentrate on the bird in the hand. We can go back later for the birds in the bush.
None of the hops in their fleet of the most modern jet aircraft was more than 2.5 hours, and the service was more than efficient. Since we were landing in Bombay, I decided on a tour through the south, ending up at Madras, and then on from there to Australia. The whole tour was included in our international ticket. Before long, we found ourselves in Goa. What a beautiful place. It used to be a Portuguese settlement, and it's a perfect mixture of east and west, like the great Basilica Bom Jesus, which towers over the palm trees. I'd been worried about the heat in India.
It can't be hot everywhere all the time. I mean, Rome's pretty hot too in midsummer. Anyway, most of the hotels are air-conditioned, and even the cars in some places.
And of course, as always, she was right. It was hot sometimes, and marvelously relaxing. And you know, one of the greatest pleasures in the world is to drink fresh coconut juice from an Indian palm tree. The other special charm about Goa is that beautiful coastline and the varied landscape with so many kinds of trees and flowers. And of course the beaches. Take Kalangut, for instance. It's everything a beach should be. Helen loved it all. And the best part was that she loved me all the more for bringing her there. Those beautiful Indian beaches took us completely by surprise. After Goa, we travelled to Trivandrum, further down the coast in the state of Kerala. And then on a few miles to Kovalam. There we stayed in a hotel high over the sea. I must say, I'd heard of Indian hospitality, but frankly, the overwhelming warmth of the people would have melted old Scrooge's heart. Everyone we met was so anxious to show us the local sights. Helen had found a hat that the local fishermen wear. And she did her Daughters of the Sea bit on the rocks overlooking that glorious beach, where incidentally they were building holiday chalets on the edge of the sea. The bathing was out of this world, and the surf was just right for beginners like us. At Peria, we travelled on a boat that was like a moving platform from which we studied the 500-square-mile wildlife sanctuary. What a way to study elephants. Believe it or not, there are more than 500 of them at Peria, masses of other exotic creatures as well. Rare animals like the white-stockinged gaur or the Indian bison, and the massive samba deer. From Peria, we drove through charming villages to Madurai, which is one of India's most ancient cities, with a history that dates back to the 6th century BC. The famous temple there is dedicated to Meenakshi, the fish-eyed goddess, and it has 9 majestic gopurams or towers, which are a mass of carved figures. In the center of the temple area is the massive gold roof which covers the goddess in her secret inner sanctum. The temples at Mahabalipuram, near Madras, were carved out of solid granite by a great imperial race, the Pallavas, who ruled southern India 1300 years ago. It is said that there were once 7 temples like this one at Mahabalipuram, but the sea has reclaimed all but this beautiful little shore temple. And under the waves of the Bay of Bengal lies most of what used to be the main port of the great Pallava kings. We intended to ride back on our donkeys to the hotel along the beach, but the donkeys didn't want to be ridden. Perhaps they didn't approve of the Indian shirt and beads that Helen had bought for me. And I must say, at first I thought they had a point, but when I wore them, they felt the most natural thing in the world. Anyway, My business suits, the realities of the London rat race could certainly wait a little longer. And Helen wasn't waiting for her thirst-quenching glass of Bangalore beer. That glorious Indian sun is really to be enjoyed, as long as you're dressed right and there are cool drinks to hand. The Silver Sands is a collection of very romantic beach chalets, each one a self-contained nest for people such as we. And if a holiday has to end, a perfectly beautiful place to end it. And when we relaxed that evening and looked back, it seemed as though no week had ever flown so fast. We'd seen so much, but there was so much more to see. And I decided that in future, all my business trips were going to take a little longer. I knew that the Indian affair had only just begun.